Hey, good morning. If you've got a Bible, let's go to Ruth chapter 1. It's interesting what he just said. He talked about how the church that they're starting in these places often begin with many children, and give it some time. That over time there are more and more adults that show up, and they're the parents of these kids. And anytime we have been to third world country where we're working with churches that we've been the same. You see a large influx of children in the churches, and over time, it's the parents of these kids that come in. And I was, in fact, just recently when we went to Panama, that's what we saw. We had gathered a couple times for the church there in the city in Jaque or in the village, and many children, and that's kind of where the church is born from, reaching the children, and then here come the families. And so this is what we are fostering here by taking these boxes and sending them out. That we are these children are hearing the gospel of Jesus Christ, and they're hearing about what it means to follow Christ and being connected into churches. And you reach a child, and you're hoping that you reach the family as well. And it seems to be that this is what God is doing, how God is using this ministry. So we have one more week to take these boxes home and fill them up. This week, our family went out and bought all of our stuff for our boxes, and are getting ready to pack all that up and bring them out. And who am I kidding? It'll be here like right before the truck leaves. That's just the way that we tend to do in our family. So, but yeah, hopefully that if you haven't already, go ahead and grab your box or two or however many you would like, and bring that back this week or this next Sunday. Have you ever been in a situation where you're looking around and it's just chaos, and you're like you walk into a room, or you walk into I don't know, you just look and you're like, is anybody in charge here? Like, is there anybody that's paying attention? I don't know if you ever experienced like walking to a restaurant and you sit at your table and somebody seats you there, and then there's like no a waitress or a waiter that's coming, and you're just waiting and you're going, is anybody paying attention? Is anybody paying attention? Like, what's going on? And in a lot of ways, you think about just looking out into this world, look into our country, you look at all the what's going on with the political landscape, and just in so many things, and you're like, is anybody like paying attention to what's going on? You look at your own home, and you look around, and you're like, man, is anybody in charge here? What's going on? You look at your own life. You see your own life. You see the chaos in your own life. Perhaps some of you have been through seasons where it's just been like one thing after another, and you're like, and you just kind of throw your hands up, and it's like, is anybody paying attention? Like, is there anybody in charge? Like, I know I've said that I believe that there is a God who is, over and above all this stuff, but I don't know. My life is so chaotic. It's just hard for me to believe that there's anybody kind of putting this all together and in place. Maybe all this is just God kind of winds us up and lets us go, and we just kind of do our life and see how it works out on the other side. Sometimes it just feels so chaotic, and you wonder, is there any order to this at all? Is this just random? I get that, and here's the thing. I believe that the Bible clearly teaches that not only is God paying attention, but God is in charge. Like, he is doing things. Like, he is working things out. He is actively working, not just in the big stuff of the world, but in every detail of your life and of my life. And I realize that raises a lot of questions when it comes to, well, what about the evil? What about suffering that's going on? And when you look and you go through stuff in your own life, and there doesn't seem to be any redeeming value in any of it. There's no good in any of it. And you're like, God, if God is all powerful, and if God really is in charge, and if God really is good, then explain this. I get that. A few times throughout the story of the scripture, in fact, if you're kind of new to this whole deal with the Bible, and here's what we got. We got a really thick, big book here, right? And it's really not just one book. In fact, it's not. It's a collection of books written by more than 40 authors over the period of hundreds of years, and they actually all tell one story. There's all kinds of books. There's poetry, there's prophecy, there's letters, there's all kinds of books, but they all tell one story, and that is the story that God is writing through this, that it's his story of redemption, that the world is broken, and he's writing how he is, like, this is how I am putting this all back together again. This is how I'm revealing who I am, the goodness and the glory of who I am through saving people and making the world the way it should be. And so this is telling God's redemption story. That's telling God's plan of salvation. And there's a few times in the scripture where it seems like this story that God is writing, that God's plan for salvation it's like about over. Like it's just not going to make it. It's not going to get to the next chapter, let alone the next book. That it's just not going to happen. Like it all comes down. You'll see every once in a while when you read through this story, through this, like I'm talking like the whole story, you stop at something, you come to something that's like, this is an impossible situation. And if this situation doesn't work out, it's all over. Like God's plan of redemption is done. There is no plan of redemption. Like it's over if this one thing does not pan out. And it seems like often, or a few times in this story, like the whole plan just kind of bottlenecks in on one person. And if it doesn't go well with this one person, story is over. Just close the book. It's over. Well, that is what happens. That's what we get in this story, in the story of Ruth. We're going to pick it up today, Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, and we get a little bit of background right off the bat. It says, in the days when the judges ruled. You just got to know, I just want you to know, as we're walking through this book, this story, that you got to know kind of what's going on in the background. This is a time, what he just said, this is a time when the judges ruled in Israel. What that means is it was chaotic time. It was a time of there were no presidents, there was no king, there was no what's the word I'm looking for? There was no prime minister. There was no government really at all ruling in Israel. It was a time when the judges ruled. That was it. The judges ruled. And we think judges, we think about courts and all of that. That's not necessarily what's happening here. When you think judges ruling here, you think local military leaders. That's who was ruling. It was essentially this idea that if we can just keep our borders safe, if we can just keep the others from coming in and destroying us and messing with our lives, then we would be okay. And so there was nobody there to say, hey, this is how God said to live in this country. There was no one to govern that. It was just pure chaos. And so it turned into, there was a lot of immorality, there's a lot of idolatry, there was violence, there was infighting with one another. This is a scenario, this is what's happening in Israel when this story was taking place. It says, in the days when the judges ruled. In fact, in the book right before Ruth is the book of Judges. These two just kind of go hand in hand. And the last verse in that book describes pretty well what was happening. And it says this, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Does that not describe where we live? Everyone just does what is right in their own eyes. There's no moral standard. You just do what makes you happy, and I'm just going to do what makes me happy, and I'm going to leave you alone, and you just leave me alone. You just go after your own truth, whatever that might be, and I'll figure out whatever my truth is, and I'll live according to that, and we'll just exist this way. We'll just coexist this way. In the meantime, what happens? It just gets chaotic. It just gets chaotic to the point where we don't even know which bathroom we should use, right? Like it's just chaos. Sin is normalized in our culture. Sin becomes normalized in our church. This is what is happening in the state or in the country and the nation of Israel during the time of this story. It says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And so God promised Israel, God said, look, you're my people. I set you up to let it be known to the world, like this is who I am. So this is what God does. He takes the small, the insignificant, and he makes something of them to say, hey, only I could do that. He does this to show who he is. And so he takes this little nation. He says, you are mine. I'm your God. And you're going to show the rest of the world who I am by the way that you live your life. By the way, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to take care of you. And through this relationship here, the world is going to see the one true God, who I am. And so God says, look, as long as you obey me, as long as you do live life the way that I created life to be lived, you will do this. You will rightly display who I am to the world. And in doing so, I will take care of you. I'll make sure that there are no enemies coming in to take you over. I'll keep your enemies at bay. And two, I'll make sure you got plenty of food on the shelves. I'll make sure that your crops grow in abundance. You live this life the way that I've called you to live this life, or I've created you to live, and I'll take care of you. I'll keep you safe. I'll keep your belly filled. I will take care of you. But Israel has abandoned God. And so now God's going, okay, so then just do what you do. Just do you. You don't want this relationship. You don't want me in it. Okay, then and so now what happens? Their shelves are empty. They have no food on the shelves. And this famine has reached into Bethlehem, which sounds odd because when you know the name, when you know what Bethlehem means, the word Bethlehem literally means house of bread. So there is no bread in the house of bread. There is no bread in the house. It's like going to an all-you-can-eat buffet and there's no food. It's like that doesn't make any sense. There's no bread in the house of bread. So there's a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. So this is a guy that's just trying to do, what he can do to take care of his family. That's what you have here. This is a guy that is, he decides, look, there's no food here. My kids keep asking for food. I don't have any answer for them, so we're getting out of here. And so we're going to get out of Bethlehem, and we're going to go find a place that has food. This guy's name is Elimelech. His name means, my God is king. My God is king. He has a wife named Naomi, whose name means pleasant. And they have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and their names mean sick and frail. You got kids that are born in a famine. I guess that's all they had. They're like, there's no hope for these kids. Sick and frail. That's who they had. So Elimelech takes his family. He leaves Israel, and they go to the country of Moab. We got to get out of here. There's no food here. We got to get to a place where there's some food. And so they go to the country of Moab, which is a big problem. It's a big problem for 2 reasons. One, God had promised his people that his presence would be with them in Israel. I'll be with you in Israel, and that he would provide for them in Israel, that he would meet with them in Israel. And it's where in Israel where his people would show the world, hey, look at us and you'll see who the one true God is. That will take place by you in Israel. Number 2, the second reason this move is a problem is because God had specifically told Israel to stay away from Moab. That Moab got its start with a guy named Lot, who had a child with his daughter. It was a nation that hated Israel. They did everything they could do to seduce Israel into sexual immorality and worshiping their false gods. And so God tells Israel, I want you to just stay away from Moab. I don't want you getting mixed up with Moab. But here's Elimelech, whose name means, my God is king, going, I know what God has said, but we're getting out of here and we're going to Moab. And he leads his family away from the presence of God, away from the provision of God, and away from the people of God to a place where there is no temple to worship God, where there are no people worshiping the one true God. And you look at this and you go, Elimelech, what are you doing? And he would tell you, I'm just doing what I need to do to take care of my family. It's like, but But man, there's more to taking care of your family than just providing food for your kids. I mean, the animals do that. What about leading your wife and your children to know God? What about leading your wife and your children to follow God and to follow His way? You know, the stuff that matters for eternity. Elimelech, don't forfeit your family's eternity for a piece of bread, man. Elimelech is a guy whose name, he bears the name, my God is king, but lives his life as though he is king. And so removing him and his family away from the blessing of God. Because when you get away from the people of God, man, it's just really difficult to experience the blessing of God. And I wonder how many, if truth be told, I wonder how many here, like you proclaim that God is king, like you don't deny that God is God and that God is king, but your life says something different. That the way that you spend your money, the way that you spend your time, the things that consume your thoughts, what you do in the dark, what you do when you're alone, what you do in that relationship, the things that you say, it all declares, like I know what you say with your mouth, but your life betrays you. It betrays the words that are coming out of your mouth, that my God is king, because your life declares who you really think is king. Listen, men in the room, there is more to life than making a paycheck and putting food on the table. There's honoring God with your life. There's leading your wife. There's leading your children to honor God. Listen, single ladies in the room, this is what you're looking for. You're looking for a man who is serious about honoring God with his life, who will love you enough to lead you to honor God, who will take serious getting his family around the people of God and into the presence of God to experience the blessing of God. Elimelech takes his family to the country of Moab, and they remain there. You don't get the idea that that was the intent. And initially, it said they were going to sojourn in Moab. They're just going to be resident aliens. We'll just be there for a moment, but we really belong to Israel. But they remain there. They go there to remain there, and they remain there without the people of God, without the provision of God, and without the presence of God. It says, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her two sons. So Naomi just lost her husband. She is in a foreign land with a foreign country with gods that she does not recognize. These people are not her people. And her security, her protection just died. Her husband died. This was not part of the plan. Elimelech moved his family to Moab so that they would live, so that they would not die. Well, there's still a bit of hope for Naomi. Actually, there is hope for Naomi because she has two sons who can work and take care of the family and carry on the family name, the family line. He says these two sons took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. So these boys, they follow in their father's footsteps and ignore what God says, and they marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And they lived there in Moab for 10 years. And both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. It's difficult for us to understand and to imagine the grief that Naomi is walking through. Just in a short amount of time, she has buried her husband and she's buried her two sons. She's in a foreign land, away from her God, away from her people, with no husband or son to protect or provide for her. She's getting older. This is a hopeless situation. She had to be asking, why? Like, what did I do? I followed my husband to get some food so that our family was there. Why? I'm sure you've been there. Maybe you got a report from the doctor, or maybe you got a notice from your employer that says there's no need for you to show up tomorrow. The divorce is final, perhaps, and you're going, God, why? Well, after asking why, what do you do? Well, what Naomi does is she returns to God and she returns to her people. This is what we see next. It says, then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. Naomi gets word that the famine at home is over, and Israel is over, and she knows, this is what we see here. She knows that this was God, because this is what God does. He provides for his people in Israel. And she knows this was God providing for his people, so she decides to go back to Bethlehem. Now listen, for Naomi to go back to Bethlehem, this was just going back home. This was just going home. But for her 2 daughters-in-law, this meant going to a foreign country, to a new people with a new culture and a new God that Moab does not worship. And so somewhere along the way, Naomi decides to have a conversation with Ruth and Orpah, and here's what happens. Verse 8, it says, but Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. It's just interesting to me that Naomi is going through the worst time of her life, and yet she still acknowledges that God is a God of kindness. The word here that she uses when she says kindly, it's a word it's a Hebrew word hesed. It literally means loving kindness. That Ruth knows, or Naomi knows, that even though life has just gone terrible for her, she's going, but I know God is still a God of kindness, of loving kindness. And so go back to your own people, and God I'm sure God will show kindness to you. She goes on. She said, the Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? In that culture, they had this strange custom that if a woman's husband died, the brother of the dead husband would then take her to be his wife. That way that the name of the husband could carry on through her children. It's a strange custom, but it's really important for you to understand that if you're going to understand what's happening here in this story throughout the duration of the story. So Naomi, she goes far enough in this journey where she had left. Interesting that she had left home, or she had left where she was living in Moab with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they all left together. And somewhere along the way in the journey, she gets far enough away that if Naomi or if Ruth or Orpah wanted to try to convince her to stay, it's just not going to happen. She's like, no, I'm too far in. I'm not going to leave now. I'm not going to go back now. But instead, even though she loves these women, they spent the last 10 years together. You notice when she dresses her daughters-in-law, she's going, you are my daughters. Like they have done life, they have grieved together. Like she loves these women. Even though she loves them dearly, she tells them to go back home so that they can find husbands. Go back to your people, go back to your land. And Naomi is making the case here by saying, she's going, look, I'm too old to get married again. And there's no baby coming anytime soon. I'm too old to get married. And so she's like, even if I were to go back home tonight and find a husband tonight and get married tonight and get pregnant tonight, it would still be another 20 years before you could get married. You could get married to one of my sons if I had a son. She's like, no, just go back. Go back to your people. She says, no, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. And here we see the enormous amount of grief that has come over Naomi. She has grown bitter about life. She has not lost her theology. She's not lost her understanding of who God is. God has not abandoned me. God is here. In fact, He is here so much that He is against me. She is bitter about life and what life has brought her. Hope is on the horizon, though. She knows that the famine is over in her hometown, that Ruth and Orpah they're willing to stay with her. They're willing to go with her. But Naomi only sees that, no, everything is against me. Everything is against me. If you've ever gone through a season of depression, a time of depression in your life, like this is what that feels like. It's impossible for you to see that there's any sign of hope whatsoever. Ruth is going to go. We're going to see here in just a moment. Ruth is going to go with Naomi. Naomi does, in fact, have someone in her family that could marry Ruth or Orpah and carry on her name, on the name. But Naomi forgets all of that. And she just says, no, I have no one for you. There's nothing good about staying with me. Just go home. She cannot see anything beyond her grief. As far as she can see, there's only darkness and there's no way out. Listen, this is why we need each other. This is why we need one another. We need someone, you and I, we need someone in the darkness. When you're experiencing the darkness, all I can see is the darkness. I don't ever see a way out. There's no hope in this. We need someone to come into the darkness. You need someone to come into your darkness and is willing to say, look, I know you can't see any hope right now, but I can. And I'm with you until we get there. Like we gotta have one another. I'm with you, that someone to say, I'm with you in this. It says, and they lifted up their voices and they wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. In other words, she's kissing her goodbye. Orpah is going back. But Ruth clung to her. And she said, Naomi said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Returned after your sister-in-law. It's significant what Naomi just said. She just told Ruth, go back with Orpah. Go back to your people. Go back to your gods. Now here's what's crazy about that. Naomi is a believer. Like she's a worshiper of the one true God. Like she never lost that. She's not denying that God is in it and God exists. In fact, that next week we're going to come to this, and it makes us a bit uncomfortable that God would be doing this. Like God is not only allowed, but He is in it. Like she's not abandoned her belief in God. She's a worshiper of the one true God, and yet she's telling her daughters-in-law, hey, go worship the other gods. That's like the worst evangelism strategy ever, okay? Like, we don't recommend that. She's making the same mistake that Elimelech just made. She isn't thinking about eternal stuff. She's just thinking, look, your best bet for a husband and for a family, for children, it's all in Moab. So just go to Moab. I know this is like your best bet for happiness in this life is there. Just go. And she didn't say this out loud, but this is what she's insinuating. Even if it means spending eternity in hell, go. Man, I don't know if you can identify with that. Like you do all the church stuff, but in the everyday decisions of your life, like in the everyday stuff, it's really just about what can you get out of this temporary stuff. Like the things that get you all worked up, the things that get you angry, the things that you're fearful of, the things that get you worried and anxious over. It's It's this stuff. Or does the way that you live your life point to the fact that you live for a different kingdom? That you don't live for this kingdom. You're living for a kingdom that will last forever. Man, it's so easy to fall in line with the thinking of this world. And let me tell you, billions are being spent right now to get you to fall in line with that thinking. Naomi is trying to get Ruth to go home, but watch this. Watch Ruth's response. This is a big deal. But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return home from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. And there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." Three things we see here in Ruth's response. One, we see that this is Ruth's conversion. This is her conversion. This is her turning away from the gods of Moab and all the false gods and turning to the one true God. This is it right here. Ruth in this moment is not simply expressing her devotion to Naomi. She's expressing her devotion and faith in Naomi's God. The Hebrew, what this was originally written in, the Hebrew literally reads like this: your God, my God. Your people, my people. Ruth isn't pledging something for the future to say, hey, once I get there, your God will be my God. And once I'm there, your people will become my people. That's not what's happening here. She is stating something that has already been done, a faith and identity that is already hers. She is going, Naomi, because your God is my God and your people are my people, I'm going with you. This isn't about a commitment to Naomi. This is about a commitment to God. This is why Ruth cannot go back to Moab and the people of Moab and the gods of Moab, because she has been converted. Essentially, Ruth is going, Naomi, stop telling me to go back. I can't go back. I've been changed. Naomi was the only person that she knew. It was the only one that she knew that worshiped this God. And somehow, through the way that Naomi walked through unimaginable grief, somehow Ruth witnessed that, and it brought Ruth to a place where she's going, Naomi, I want what you have. See, we so easily fall into this idea that the reason that people will want to follow Jesus is if they see how great my life is. If they just look at my life and see how everything's going or see that I'm just always, there's always a smile on my face and I'm just, how you doing? Blessed and highly favored. I'm just good. Everything's great. Everything's just good. I'm fine and good and great. It's just great. This is what we do, right? This is good, and it makes us just fake it. And we're faking it because we know different. But if people are going to want this Jesus that I say that, brings me satisfaction and joy, then I've got to put on I'm all totally satisfied and joy-filled. And all I know is that just means that everything's great. But here's the problem with that. One of the problems with that. One of the problems with that is what it's going to do to your faith. Because if you believe that your life should just be great, it should just go awesome, everything should just go great, and when it's not, because it's not, and so you're faking it, you're putting it on for everybody else, eventually that's going to come back to you, and you're going to go, what am I doing here? Because if, you might ask yourself, am I even a Christian? Because if I believe that being a Christian, following Jesus makes my life awesome, I know my life is not awesome. So maybe I'm not a Christian, or two, maybe this is all just made up. Because I know the reality, and my life is not always great. And here's the other part of that. what you're projecting, like everything's great, just following Jesus makes your life great. If they decide to follow Jesus, it won't be because they want Jesus. It's because they want your awesome life. And if, going to church once a week and praying a prayer and getting maybe baptized or something, doing some sort of churchy thing gets me the life that I want, then count me in. And they wouldn't say this out loud, but it's not because I'm so devoted to Jesus, but I am certainly devoted to my plan for my life. And if Jesus can give me that, then count me in. But listen, somehow in Naomi's life, she didn't hide her pain. I mean, she's not making it out that it's great. She's going, look, I worship a God who's come against me. Go back to your gods. Like, this God has brought death to my husband, death to my boys. I'm hopeless out here. This is what my God has brought me. Like, he's alive and well, and this is what he's doing. And somehow she's not hiding her pain, but somehow in that, she was able to lean in toward God. And to Naomi, God was enough. And somehow Ruth looked at Naomi's life. Even though the God that Naomi worshiped did not stop Naomi from an immense amount of pain, Ruth saw something there where she said, your God will be my God. So we see this is Ruth's conversion too. We see Ruth's incredible faith here. Ruth was leaving her family, she's leaving her culture, she's leaving her language, she's going to an unknown place where she would be likely scorned because of where she's from. For all she knew, what she was expecting, she would be embracing the life of a widow for the rest of her life, will never become a mother. This is the life that Ruth understood that this was going to be the rest of her life if she followed Naomi. She understood this. If she would follow Naomi and embrace Naomi's God. After Jesus' death and resurrection, we talked about a conversation a few weeks ago that Jesus had with Peter. Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. Jesus goes on, dies, is raised from the dead, and then Peter, for all, he's just thinking, he's done with me. I'm going back to fishing. This is just what I did. It's how I made money before. I got to take care of my family. So he goes back to this life, and then Jesus calls him out. And he has this one-on-one with Peter, and I can't imagine Peter's going, this is it. This is when he's officially taken me off the team because I've just messed this up like royally. And so Jesus stands there, and we saw, and if you know what happened, like Jesus is going, I'm not done with you. I'm not done with you. Peter, I know. And he asked him the question, do you love me? And Peter's like, yes. Do you love me? He's like, yeah, 3 times. 3 times, 3 questions for 3 denials. Do you love me? Yes. You know that I love you, Peter says. So Jesus at the end of that conversation says, all right, Peter, listen. I still got a plan for you, man. It hasn't changed. I still have a purpose for you. And here's what he tells Peter. He says, I just want you to know there's coming a time. Here's where following me will lead. There's coming a time where they will stretch out your hands. And you will be put on a cross and nailed to a cross like I was. Death is coming for you, Peter, by execution for following me. That's what's coming. And then check this out. Here's what he says. It's the last thing he says. So follow me. Listen, Jesus never promised following him would be easy or keep us from suffering. But he did say that following him would bring hardship, that it would bring suffering, that it would bring pain. But Jesus is saying to Peter, and he's saying to us, listen, it's better to follow me to death on the cross than to live this life of comfort and safety without me. This is what Ruth was facing. She could go back to her old life with her family and her friends and start over with a husband and children and live the life that she dreamed of. Or she could abandon that dream. She could abandon those comforts for a life full of unknown and inevitable hardship, worshiping the one true God. And Ruth has counted the cost, and she says, Naomi, I'm not going back. I know what it's going to cost. I know what's ahead. I know I cannot go back. You see Ruth's incredible faith. And then number 3, you need to know that one of God's promises in pain is that you don't have to go through it alone. One of God's promises in pain is that you do not have to go through pain alone. As one who belongs to Christ, part of God's grace in your life is that you get a family who are the people of God. You see, the reason that Ruth can say that she belongs to Naomi is because she belongs to God. This is what the church is. It's a people who belong to one another because we belong to God, that God makes us a people. This is what we have. This is what God is doing, that what we have in common is that we belong to God, and in doing so, God makes us a people, makes us a family. Before Jesus went back to heaven after his resurrection, he told his followers, he said this, he said, I am with you to the end of the age. I am with you to the end of the age. Now, how is that true if he is not physically here with us? He is with us through the Holy Spirit, and he is with us through each other, through other believers, through the people of God. And we need one another. We need one another because we need Jesus to live this life. Like, I need you because the reason I need you is because you embody the presence of Jesus. And I need Jesus to live this life. That we need one another because we need Jesus. Jesus told us, he said that Satan is like a prowling lion looking for someone to devour. That's what he said. You want to get a picture, a mental image of who Satan is? Let me tell you, he is like a prowling lion looking for someone to devour. Now, let me ask you, who does the lion go after? Who does the lion look for? I've told you before about the time that I was on a safari in Kenya, and we watched these 2 lions pounce on this buffalo that had a bad leg and was left, like the pack had left him. Like these 2 lions, or we see these 2 lions just crouching down and walking, and we turn around and there's just this one buffalo by itself with the bad leg. This is who the lions go after. This is who Satan goes after. He goes for those who have been separated from the people of God. Those who don't open themselves up to be known. That, hey, this is where my temptation is. This is where my sin is. This is where I'm struggling. These are the people that Satan goes after. And we have a responsibility to one another to know where we are, where each other are in fighting sin and living on mission. Listen, I get that some of you come in here this morning and you just come kind of stumbling in. You came in here this morning and your life is in shambles because of your sin. Like sin has wreaked havoc on your life. And the truth be known, you just kind of wonder, I don't even know if I should be in here. Like, if these people knew what I was what's going on in my life and what I've been chasing and what's been, I don't know if I should be here. Let me tell you, if that's you, you should be here. And church, we've got to be a place, we've got to be a people who love people enough to meet people where they are. And come on, that should not be a problem. It should not be a problem. Because there ain't anything anybody can say in this room that's going to surprise us. You know why? Because we've been there. Like if we were, I'm talking, okay, church people here that feel kind of like I'm doing the church thing. Listen, if we were to take, let's just say we were to take your sin from just this past week, like your thoughts, your motives, the things you've done, the things that you've said, and we just did it, just scrolled them right here. on the screen. And just say we did that with me. I would be mortified, and you would be mortified. And here's why. Because you would find out that, yeah, I get it. We all know what sin's about. We've got to be a people that embrace, that open ourselves up to welcome people in, to meet people where they are. But it's not enough to just open up our arms and say, hey, come on in, we'll meet you where you are. We've got to love people enough to not be okay with each other staying in the same destructive patterns of sin. Like, we got to love one another enough to have an awkward conversation. Like, we got to love one another enough to weep with one another because of what sin has been doing in your life and in my life. So, to those of you who are weary and worn out and in need of strength, to the brokenhearted, life has just not gone the way that you had hoped life would go, and you are in need of comfort. To the broken, abused, and weak in need of healing. To the anxious and the worried in need of peace. To the shame-filled and the sinners in need of a Savior. Welcome. This church opens wide its doors to you. And we are so glad that you're here. And some of you are in this room going, well, that's great, but my life seems to be going pretty well right now. Well, all right, you egomaniac. Let me tell you, listen, we need you here too. Like, we need you to encourage the rest of us to walk with us through our stuff and through our sin. And like, we need you. But listen, and I don't mean to like rain down on your like parade of glory and joy and all that, but listen, your day's coming. Like, that's not like a threat. That's like reality. Like, that day is coming for you, and you're going to need us. Like, you're going to need someone to come alongside you. God's grace to us is that we have one another. We have one another. And so Ruth said, Naomi, you can say all you want. You can. I'm not going back. I can't go back. Here's how this part ends. It says, and when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she just said no more. She just said no more. I'll be honest with you, when I read that, it's not exactly the response I thought Naomi would give. Like, I thought Naomi would be kind of like, are you serious? Like, I thought there would be a little bit more weeping, these women. But moving on. But I thought there would be something there. I thought that maybe it's like, hey, you're going to go with me. Okay? And I thought, just the fact that she said, your God is my God. I thought there would be, but you see that Naomi, she is just deep in grief. And as we're going to find, she's deep in bitterness. And so she just doesn't say anymore. Listen, Ruth is an outsider. Like, she's an outsider. Like, she knew nothing of God. Like, she knows nothing. She knew nothing of like David, Abraham. She's like, Abraham, I should say, and some of the, like, she knew nothing of these promises that God gave. Like, she knew nothing of the covenants of God. She knew nothing of this. She knew nothing how Israel got its start. She didn't know anything about. She didn't know anything. She was an outsider. I don't know anything about this God except for what I've learned from Naomi in her grief. She's an outsider. She knows nothing, and yet God makes Ruth his own. You say, well, how do you know? I mean, we know what Ruth has said, but how do we know that God has like bought in on this? Like she's from Moab, for Pete's sake. How do we know that God accepted her? Because here's how we know. And listen, I know we're in Sermon 1, chapter 1, but spoiler alert, okay? Ruth goes on to become the great, and on and on and on, grandmother of Jesus himself. You see, the truth of the matter is we all were outsiders. All dead in our sin, alienated from God. Truth of the matter is we were not looking for God. We were not looking, we were just fine, just how we were. I'll figure it out. I'll find another way. I'll find a way. I know there's brokenness, but I'll figure it out. We were not looking for God. We were worshiping the gods of this world. But God, in his mercy, sent his son Jesus not to judge the world, but to save us by paying for our sin with his own life. He died for our sins and was raised to life so that we might have a new life that worships the one true God. And true Christianity looks like turning our back on the gods of this world in order to have Christ. So what about you? Like, what is your position before God right now? Have you come to faith in Jesus Christ, the one who left heaven and came to earth that you might become part of God's people? Which road will you take? The broad road of Orpah or the narrow road of Ruth? Like even if you're the only one, you still in? Is Jesus worth it? Alistair Begg he's a pastor of a church, Parkside Church in Cleveland. He once told about how he went to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to Harvard to speak, and he said he stopped in a coffee shop to go over his notes for the sermon that he was getting ready to give. He says that he was sitting there in the coffee shop with his Bible and his notes on the table. It said this Chinese girl, who was a Harvard student, came over, saw his Bible on the table, and came over and she asked, "Are you a Christian?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "I'm a Christian too." And he said, I was in my mind, I'm thinking, well, how in the world did this happen? Like, what kind of events had to take place for the gospel to get to China to reach this girl where she is a Christian? It's like, how did all this take place? And he said, this is just what I'm thinking in my head. But the way it came out, he said, I just asked, how did you become a Christian in China? And you know what she said? She said this. She said, I enter through narrow gate. I enter through narrow gate. You see, that's what happened here. Ruth entered through the narrow gate. There's thousands of people will be at Paul Brown Stadium today to watch the Bengals play. But each one will enter into that stadium through the gate, one at a time. Listen, there is a way to forgiveness and healing and joy and heaven. It's not an easy way. It's not the way that most people go, but it is the only way. It's through the narrow gate. It's through faith in Jesus Christ, who came for us, died for us, was raised for us, and there is no other name by which you can be saved than by his name. Do you know him? Do you know him? Does your life speak to the fact that he is your king? Even if you're the only one, would you follow him?